It's late again. Too late for dinner. Too early for sunrise. And sleep still playing hard to get. You've tried lying still. You've tried thinking of nothing. But your brain, ever loyal, keeps spinning, worrying about what didn't get done, what might go wrong, what already did. Maybe it's the quiet that makes it worse. The way the dark lets old thoughts return like ghosts. Anxiety, ADHD, heartache, or just that aching kind of loneliness that doesn't need a reason. Whatever you're carrying tonight, I see it. You're not imagining the weight, and you don't need to carry it alone. So for now, let's set it down together. Let's drift gently into a different time. A time of candlelight and superstition. Of narrow alleyways, creaky shutters, and stories whispered between mouthfuls of fear. Let's go back to the days when people believed cats weren't just cats. You blink and find yourself on a crooked cobblestone street. The air is damp, not cold, just heavy with fog. A lantern swings from an iron hook nearby, its flame, small but steady. You hear a sound behind you, not footsteps exactly, softer, quieter, almost like silk brushing stone. You turn. A cat, jet black, eyes glowing gold in the lantern light. It stares at you, not hostile, not afraid, just knowing. Its tail twitches once, then again. It doesn't meow. It doesn't run. It just watches. And suddenly you remember you've heard this story before. People used to believe cats were more than animals. They were spies, familiars, watchers, servants of witches, or witches themselves caught halfway between worlds. It sounds silly now in the age of LED lights and science podcasts. But back then, cats were suspicious. They didn't obey. They didn't bark. They walked alone, slept. Where they pleased, came and went like smoke. They seemed to vanish and reappear, not because of magic, but because they didn't care to explain. And for people who feared what they didn't understand, that was enough. You walk a little farther. There's a door ahead, slightly ajar. Inside, an old woman sits by the fire. A cat curls in her lap. She strokes its fur absent-mindedly, whispering something that might be a prayer or a spell. A neighbor watches from across the alley. His eyes narrow. He clutches across. Because a woman who lives alone, suspicious. A woman with herbs, dangerous. A woman with a cat witch. And so cats became guilty by association. They were blamed for crop failures, for plagues. They were burned, drowned, hunted, all because they were too quiet, too clever, too comfortable in the dark. You step back into the fog. The black cat has followed you. It brushes against your leg, then disappears into shadow. Not magic, just mystery. And sometimes mystery is enough to scare people. If this quiet story is helping you feel calmer, you're welcome to like or subscribe. Only if it soothes something in you. No pressure. So, where are you tonight? lying in bed with one foot outside the blanket, wrapped in silence, or the low hum of a fan, still wide awake, but softer around the edges. You're allowed to be exactly where you are. You're allowed to need rest, even if sleep hasn't come yet. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Feel the weight of your body, your real breathing body, supported by the bed beneath you. Tonight we'll walk a little farther into this foggy world where cats weren't just companions, but symbols of fear of femininity, of freedom. Let's begin. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of flickering torches, wind-blown cloaks, and strange meows that echo a little too loudly through the night. Picture this, you're trudging along a muddy road, boots soaked, your cloak sticking uncomfortably to your back, and the wind howling like a gossip with too much to say. The storm rolls above you, dark and full of opinions. And just when you think it can't get any weirder, you spot it. Two glowing eyes low to the ground watching a black cat, perfectly dry, perfectly still, perfectly not blinking. You stop. It doesn't. The lightning cracks, and for a heartbeat, it looks like the thing is smiling. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere spooky or stormy, let me know your location and the local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stare at this mysterious cat for longer than you'd like to admit. It's not doing anything particularly alarming, no levitating, no chanting in Latin, but there's something about the way it just exists, like it knows something, like it's already seen the ending of your story and finds it slightly amusing. Eventually, you decide to speak, because that's what humans do when we're nervous and damp and mildly unsettled by wildlife. You lost two. The cat doesn't answer, obviously. It just stands tail flicking in a manner that seems both sassy and ceremonial, then turns and walks off the path, glancing over its shoulder. Once, like, "Are you coming?" or "What?" So of course you follow, because you've read enough fairy tales to know that when a black cat offers you shelter, you don't say no. You also don't ask too many questions. You just follow and hope the ending doesn't involve cauldrons or mysterious disappearances. The cat leads you to a half-collapsed stone shed. It looks like the kind of place medieval ghosts hang out to complain about modern plumbing. Inside, it smells like time, like dust and moss, and maybe a hint of very old bread. The wind hisses through the gaps in the walls, but it's quieter here. Muted, almost respectful. You settle down near an old beam, lighting a tiny oil lamp you forgot you packed. Its flickering light casts the walls in gold and shadow, and the cat hops up onto a low stool, curls its tail around its paws, and begins to purr. That's when the memories begin to whisper. You've heard stories everyone has. Tales of witches with their cats, of old women with bent backs and sharper tongues living on the edge of town with a feline who always seemed too clever by half. You remember being told not to let a black cat cross your path, that it meant bad luck, that it meant a curse, that it meant somehow something was watching. But tonight, sitting here with this purring shadow creature, you start to wonder why. Why did cats get such a bad reputation long before the superstition cats were just well cats? Aloof, graceful, sometimes affectionate, often disinterested, and very, very good at not being where you expect them to be. And once upon a time, that was enough to make people suspicious. Let's rewind. Not just a few decades, but thousands of years. Back before black cats were bad luck, and long before anyone burned a woman at the stake for owning a tabby. Picture Egypt, hot sun, soft sand, the slow swirl of incense. In ancient Egyptian society, cats were revered, worshipped even. They were considered divine companions linked to the goddess Bastet, who represented home fertility and fierce protection. Cats were protectors of granaries, temples, and homes. And they did it stylishly, slinking around like they owned the place, which, frankly, they kind of did. Killing a cat, even by accident, was a serious crime, like potentially punishable by death. Historians still argue whether the punishment was applied universally or only in sacred areas, but either way, don't mess with cats in ancient Egypt. You glance at your new feline companion, who's now curled into a black comma of fur. Definitely Bastet vibes. But the admiration didn't last forever. As trade and empires expanded, cats were carried across borders and into new cultures, many of which didn't quite know what to make of them. Unlike dogs who wag and obey and do tricks, cats don't really care if you approve of them. They come and go as they please, appear where they shouldn't, and vanish when you try to catch them. And in a world that increasingly relied on religious structure and clearly defined roles, especially in medieval Europe, that unpredictability was unnerving. In Christianity's rise across the continent, anything outside of the godly order was suspect. Women who lived alone, practiced herbal medicine, or simply spoke too boldly were seen as threats. Add a cat to that mix, especially a black one, with glowing eyes, and suddenly you've got yourself a recipe for superstition. People didn't just fear cats. They feared what cats might be. Were they spies for witches? Shape-shifted demons? Familiars sent by the devil himself? It sounds absurd now, of course, but when you're living in a world lit only by fire, where death walks hand in hand with famine and plague, it's not hard to imagine shadows having teeth. You shift slightly, your back pressed against cool stone. The rain outside has softened to a gentle tapping, like fingertips on glass. The cat stretches lazily, its body long and fluid, then fixes its eyes on you again. And in the dim light, something strange happens. You don't see the cat anymore, not exactly. You see flickers of its history. One moment, it's curled in a pharaoh's lap wearing gold. The next, it's leaping from a burning thatched roof smoke in its fur. Then, it's sitting quietly beside a woman being accused of witchcraft, her eyes hollow with fear. And then it's here, just a cat, purring. The flickers fade and the world settles. Outside, thunder mumbles one last complaint, and you can hear the trees shushing each other in the wind. Inside, there's only the soft flicker of flame and the steady rhythm of feline breath. You don't speak again. There's no need. The cat has told you everything it needed to without saying a word. And you realize, not for the first time tonight, that history isn't always grand battles and kings. Sometimes it's a pair of eyes in the dark, a whisper behind a closed door, a superstition passed from mother to child, a quiet presence that never quite explains itself. And in the case of the humble house cat, it's centuries of mystery wrapped in fur. You close your eyes for a moment, not quite asleep, not quite awake. The rain becomes background music. The fire burns low. The cat's purring deepens, slow and hypnotic. And in the liminal space between past and present, myth and memory, you drift. You wake up, though, to be honest, you never fully fell asleep. It's that in-between state where your mind is foggy, but your body hasn't moved. The cat's still there, purring like a soft motor beside you, and the storm has faded into silence. For a moment, you wonder if it ever rained at all. Maybe the thunder was just the sound of old memories collapsing. You sit up slightly, joints cracking in protest. Your impromptu shelter feels like it's been here for centuries, and maybe it has. Maybe this is one of those folds in time tucked away between medieval paranoia and modern forgetfulness. A place where nothing updates and the Wi-Fi definitely doesn't reach. You glance at the cat. Okay, you murmur. So, why exactly did people think you were witches? The cat yawns, which, fair enough, it's a long story. Let's go back not to Egypt this time, but to early medieval Europe, where cats were in a bit of an identity crisis. They weren't fully divine as the Egyptians had believed, but they weren't entirely unwanted either. You needed them to control vermin. Rats and mice were constant threats, especially when food was scarce and stored poorly. Grain silos, prime rat buffet, monasteries, same deal. Even castles with their towering walls and endless staircases were not above infestation. So cats stuck around. They earned their keep. But still there was something about them that made people nervous. Maybe it was the way they watched you, or how they disappeared into the shadows like they were made of it, or how they didn't come when you called because, let's be honest, they never do. Dogs obey. Horses serve. Cows provide. Cats exist. And in a society built on hierarchy and obedience, that was just plain unsettling. By the 12th and 13th centuries, church authorities were taking a closer look at anything they couldn't control, and that included women, especially women who lived alone, even more especially those with a cat. You blink in the firelight, remembering the stories, some half-whispered, others shouted in courtrooms. Witchcraft accusations weren't random, not really. They often stemmed from fear, jealousy, or the need for a convenient scapegoat. Your cow stopped producing milk. Must be the widow next door. A storm ruined your crops. Blame the herbalist. Your husband had a wandering eye. Clearly some enchantress had cursed him. And what did these women have in common? They were outside the norm, independent, skilled in natural remedies, keepers of secrets, and often owners of cats. The idea of the familiar took hold around this time. A familiar was believed to be a spirit demon or imp that served a witch, sometimes taking the shape of an animal, most famously a cat. This creature didn't just accompany the witch. It assisted in spell work, carried messages, maybe even sucked blood in exchange for power. Yes, blood, because nothing says helpful pet like low-level vampirism. Historians still argue whether the familiar belief came more from folklore or legal invention. Some say inquisitors crafted the idea to bolster confessions, while others trace it to older pagan beliefs. Either way, the result was clear. If you were accused of witchcraft and you had a cat, things weren't looking good, especially if that cat was black. Why black? Well, it's always the color's fault, isn't it? Black was associated with the night, the unknown, the absence of light, and by extension, the absence of God's sight. The darker your fur, the more suspicious your intentions. It didn't help that black cats often appeared in cautionary tales, often as shapeshifters or omens. In fact, there's an old story from Lincolnshire, England, dating back to the 1500s, where a man and his son were walking home one night and saw a black cat. Naturally, they did what every rational person would do, beat it with sticks. The cat fled, limping into the house of a known woman in the village. The next day, she was seen with a limp. Coincidence? Maybe. Witchcraft, according to the village? Absolutely. You sigh. Poor cat. Probably just trying to go home after a rough night. Instead, she became evidence in a trial that probably ended badly for someone. Likely both someones. The fire cracks softly, and the cat stretches again, toes splayed like tiny stars. You wonder if this particular feline has ever been accused of witchcraft. Then again, maybe she was the one doing the accusing. Wouldn't that be a twist? In some cultures, cats weren't feared. They were celebrated. Sailors, for instance, loved cats. Not just because they kept rats off ships, but because they were believed to predict storms. If a cat licked its fur against the grain or sneezed, it was time to batten the hatches. If it tried to jump ship, well, you probably should too. Even in Japan, cats have long held a more mystical yet mostly positive role. The bakaneko, or monster cat, was said to transform into a human or manipulate events. Still creepy, yes, but not inherently evil. And there's the beloved maneki neko, the beckoning cat you see in store windows, waving in good fortune with its little paw. Back in Europe, though, fortune wasn't on your side if a cat crossed your path. By the 14th century, during the height of plague, panic cats were often killed en masse because they were believed to be spreading the Black Death. Ironically, this likely made the plague worse. Fewer cats meant more rats. More rats meant more fleas. More fleas meant more death. Smart move, humanity. You rest your head against the wall, eyes tracing the patterns of smoke dancing in the firelight. It's strange, really, how easily we project fear onto the unknown. How something as small and fluffy as a kitten could carry the weight of centuries of paranoia. But maybe that's the lesson. The things we don't understand, we make them magical. And once they're magical, we decide whether that magic is light or dark, helpful or harmful, divine or dangerous. Your eyes drift toward the cat once more. It's dozing now, tail twitching slightly in a dream. Maybe chasing a mouse. Maybe chasing a memory. You wonder what it remembers. Do cats hold on to the past? Do they dream of torchlit mobs and hidden scrolls? Of women whispering spells in kitchens, stirring broth and fate in equal measure? Or do they simply live moment to moment, unbothered, unburdened, and completely uninterested in your existential ponderings? Probably the latter. Still, it's nice to imagine. You close your eyes just for a moment and let your breathing slow. Because here in this forgotten place with its forgotten stories, you're safe. And tomorrow when the sun rises and the cat is gone, maybe you'll wonder if it was ever here at all. You wake again, but this time it's not because of a sound. It's something else. The quiet is deeper now, somehow heavier. That kind of hush that feels intentional, like the world holding its breath. The fire has died down to embers, and the cat is gone. You blink. For a moment, you're convinced it must have slipped out. Maybe it's off hunting or haunting somewhere nearby. But the odd thing is, there's no paw prints, no stirred dust, no warm imprint on the stool, just the faint memory of purring like an echo in your chest. So now you're alone, surrounded by the faint scent of smoke and moss, but you're not afraid. In fact, you feel strangely watched over, which is ironic, considering tonight's story is about how cats became the ones people feared were doing the watching. Let's rewind further back than the witch trials, even before the plague, to when the church was tightening its grip across Europe. It's the 10th century, and cats are slipping out of religious favor faster than a monk skipping confession. Why? Because cats, dear listener, were too independent. The church valued hierarchy, order, obedience. And here you have this creature that won't fetch, won't listen, and certainly won't pray. Worse still, cats had ties to older pagan customs. Folk in the countryside still left bowls of milk for them at night, whispered to them during births or funerals, and believed cats could see things humans could not. You know, like spirits or your deepest secrets. Clergy took note of that. Theologians began muttering about demonic associations linking cats, especially black ones, to the devil. It was subtle at first, a murmur in sermons, but the whisper grew louder as fears of heresy, sorcery, and female autonomy swirled through the continent like storm clouds. And then came the infamous papal decree. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX issued a document called Vox in Rama, which included terrifying descriptions of heretical rituals. In these rituals, a black cat was said to appear walking backwards, then speaking to its summoner in a human voice before receiving a kiss on its, well, let's say it was a very specific and unsettling location. You can imagine the chaos that caused. Historians still debate whether Vox in Rama was based on real reports from inquisitors or simply invented propaganda to justify witch hunts. But the effect was undeniable. The black cat's reputation plummeted. Overnight, it became a symbol of satanic worship. If you saw one, you weren't just looking at a stray, you were staring at sin in feline form. And here's where things get weird. Yes, weirder. Because despite all that fear, cats never fully disappeared. Even the most devout villagers couldn't bring themselves to eliminate every last one. Why? Because they still needed them. You might believe the local widow was a witch, but you also knew that mice had eaten half your barley last winter, and her cat kept the granary clean. So people lived in contradiction. They feared the cat, yet relied on it. Blamed it, yet fed it. Banished it, yet followed it home. Sound familiar? It's kind of like how you keep promising yourself you'll delete that one app, but then find yourself scrolling at 2 a.m. for the 6th night in a row. Welcome to human nature. Meanwhile, the folklore around cats began to evolve. In some regions, people believed cats had 9 lives, not because of science, but because of superstition. If you threw a cat out a window, which rude and it somehow survived, it wasn't due to feline agility. It was proof of sorcery. Each time the cat cheated death, it used up one of its infernal lifelines. By the 9th time, game over. Satan collects. In Germany, there were tales of the Mar, a night demon that suffocated sleepers. If you woke up feeling pressed down and couldn't move, a condition we now call sleep paralysis, you might blame a cat-like spirit sitting on your chest. Yes, they blamed cats for that too. And let's not forget the changeling stories. In Celtic lore, fairies were believed to swap human babies with magical doppelgangers. Sometimes, if a cat stared too long at a cradle, villagers feared it was part of the switch. Never mind that the cat probably just liked the warmth. You leaned back against the stone, the flicker of dying embers, painting shadows on the wall. It's fascinating, really, how so many legends sprouted around this one animal. Not because it did anything particularly villainous, but because it refused to be predictable. A dog you can train, a horse you can bridle. But a cat chooses you, or it doesn't. And that kind of agency makes people nervous. It's not unlike the fear some had of women who didn't marry or who practiced herbal medicine. When someone doesn't follow the script, others start looking for hidden motives, and sometimes they write their own. Witch trials weren't about cats, not really, but the cat became a symbol, a convenient marker of something not quite right, something too quiet, too observant, too feminine. And if you think I'm reaching with that last part, consider this. During many witch trials, the accused were asked not just about their rituals, but about their relationships with animals. Yes, but especially with other women. Affection between women was seen as suspicious. Intimacy was weaponized. And the presence of a cat, often a creature seen curled up in laps or nuzzling hands, added fuel to that fire. It's no wonder that the image of a witch and her cat endured. You stretch your legs, the stone cold underfoot. Somewhere outside, a night bird sings low and lilting. You imagine a time when that sound would have made someone clutch their cross, whispering prayers against the lurking evils of the dark. And somewhere nearby, maybe even on this very hill, a woman once sat with her cat and looked at that same moon, just as you're doing now. You wonder what she saw in those eyes. A companion, a protector, a secret keeper, or just a being like herself, quiet, misunderstood, and too wild to cage. So now, with the weight of those whispered tales still hanging in the air, you stand and step out of the crumbling stone shed. The night is cool, its silence thick and knowing. Somewhere in the distance you hear the crackle of brush and think maybe the cat is still nearby, weaving through the undergrowth like a thread through cloth. Your boots crunch along a thin trail. The moon above is a sliver sharp, like a sewing needle, poking through thin clouds. You walk as though retracing old paths. Maybe you are. The further you go, the more the forest opens up into what looks like a clearing, a circle of flattened earth surrounded by trees bowed inward like they're eavesdropping. In the center is an old stone ring, broken in places, moss creeping over its face. You can't help but imagine this was once a fire pit, the kind used not for warmth or cooking, but gathering, whispering, maybe even conjuring. Let's talk about those gatherings. See if cats were accused of being familiars. The women they kept company with were accused of being witches. And these gatherings, called sabbats, were supposedly where all the evil happened. Or at least, that's what inquisitors believed, or wanted others to believe. According to 15th century inquisitors like Heinrich Kramer, yes, the man who wrote the Malleus Maleficarum, aka the Hammer of Witches, sabbats were wild nighttime rituals full of dancing, flying, eating babies. Yes, really. And of course, cats. Lots of cats. Black ones mostly curling at the feet of their masters, purring spells into the dark. Historians still argue whether sabbats were actual events or the fever dreams of paranoid clergymen. Most likely, it was a mix of misunderstood folk traditions, nightmares, and forced confessions, because torture, as it turns out, is not the best tool for accurate storytelling. But these tales stuck, and cats were nearly always there, silent, watching, never blinking. You crouch at the edge of the ring and touch the cold stone. Moss gives slightly under your fingers. You wonder how many stories have bloomed here, how many accusations began with a whispered, "She has a cat," followed by silence that said, "Far more." Not all witches were accused because of a cat, of course, but it helped. If your neighbor didn't like your herbs, or your husband mysteriously died, or you simply lived alone and were too old to remarry, that was enough. Add a cat into the mix, and suddenly you weren't just suspicious, you were a threat. There's a quiet tragedy in how easily love and companionship were weaponized. You imagine a lonely woman finding joy in a purring bundle of fur, only for that joy to be turned against her. She talks to it, someone might whisper. She feeds it first, another might add. A black cat on a windowsill wasn't cute, it was dangerous. And still the cats stayed. Even in the harshest periods of witch trials, from 1450 to 1750, when tens of thousands of women, and some men, were executed across Europe, cats endured. They slipped through shadows, dodged broomsticks and boots, found homes in barns and bakeries and candlelit kitchens. It makes you wonder, were they survivors or guardians? One story from 16th century Scotland tells of a woman named Isabel Gowdy. She confessed under questionable circumstances to attending sabbats where she and others transformed into cats. "We fly," she supposedly said, "by casting off our human shape and becoming cats at will." Of course, this confession was likely extracted through pain and fear, but still, the imagery endures. You close your eyes, imagining the swirl of a midnight wind and the sudden shimmer of fur where skin had been. A tail flicks, eyes glint, and a cat darts into the trees faster than a heartbeat, not bound by the world's rules anymore, free. But of course, there's the grim side too, because with fear came violence. In the Middle Ages, especially during plague outbreaks, cats were sometimes rounded up and killed en masse, accused of carrying evil or being demonic messengers. Ironically, this often made things worse. Fewer cats meant more rats, and more rats meant more fleas, and more fleas meant more plague. Oops. You'd think they'd learn. But fear, as you know, isn't always logical. In some towns, it became a tradition to throw cats from towers during festivals. In Ypres, Belgium, they had Kattenstoet, where cats were tossed from the Cloth Hall Tower. Thankfully, these days, it's just toy cats. Progress, right? But even in darkness, odd little bits of reverence remained. In Normandy, fishermen used to keep a ship's cat for good luck, believing it could ward off storms. In Poland, cats were buried with coins, so their spirits wouldn't haunt the household. And in parts of France, people placed a cat's whisker under their pillow to dream of the future, though again, the cat probably didn't appreciate that. So much contradiction, despised and adored, feared and fed, demonized and domesticated. You rise, slowly, brushing off your hands. The clearing is quiet, but it hums with memory. You walk on guided by nothing but instinct and starlight now. And somewhere ahead, you think you hear the soft crunch of paws on dried leaves. A flicker of movement to your left. You stop. The black cat is back. It doesn't run, doesn't speak, just walks ahead again like a silent tour guide through centuries of superstition and misunderstanding. You follow. And as the two of you pass beneath twisted branches, it occurs to you, maybe cats were never witches' familiars. Maybe they were ours. Not in the sense of ownership, but as witnesses, companions, creatures that knew how to survive long before we did, and who've been quietly judging our decisions ever since. You smile to yourself. No doubt it's true. After all, they're still here, and they're still watching. The trail narrows again, curling like a lazy snake through thicker woods. Branches above form a canopy that drinks in the moonlight, filtering it into silver streaks that flicker across your path. The black cat, your shadowy guide, moves ahead, its tail a metronome to your footsteps. Not rushing, not waiting, just knowing. It feels like you're entering older territory now. Not in terms of time, you've already wandered through centuries of suspicion and superstition, but in mood. This place smells more ancient, like peat and bark and the weight of things unspoken. You half expect the trees themselves to creak out warnings, but of course they don't. They simply sway. And here's the part where things get even more interesting, because it turns out cats weren't always just pets or potential demons. For a brief, confusing, and slightly hilarious window in European history, people believed they could literally be witches in disguise, not just assistants to magic, not just demonic pets, but the witches themselves, shape-shifted, furry, furious. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from folk legends or the tortured confessions of the accused, likely both. But regardless, for many, the line between woman and feline was a little too thin for comfort. It's not hard to see where this idea came from. Cats move like they know things they're not telling. They vanish when you call. They reappear when you're sad or eating tuna. Their eyes seem older than you, like they've seen empires fall, and were deeply unimpressed by all of them. In folk tales, this feline witch crossover takes on both tragic and comic forms. One famous English tale tells of a man who injured a cat during a hunt, only to find his neighbor, an elderly woman, with an unsettling stare, limping the next day in the same spot the cat had been hurt. A coincidence? The villagers didn't think so. Spoiler, she didn't live long. Another tale, more humorous in tone, tells of a witch who transformed into a cat to spy on her enemies, only to be chased up a tree by a local dog. When she eventually changed back, she brought half the leaves with her and one very confused squirrel. Again, hard to verify, but entertaining nonetheless. You pass a stone outcropping shaped like a hunched back. You half expect it to move. In some legends, witches weren't just able to become cats, they were bound to it. Cursed even. In certain Scottish myths, if a witch turned into a cat more than 8 times, she'd be stuck like that forever. 9 lives Maybe that's not a coincidence. There's even a medieval French document from the 13th century, written in that slightly panicked tone clerics often used when dealing with things they didn't understand. That describes cats attending a witch's sabbat and participating in rituals, not sitting quietly, participating. This included drinking blood wearing tiny crowns, yes, really, and howling hymns to the devil. The image is so vivid, you almost want to believe it's real. Imagine a choir of cats out of tune yet passionate. Modern scholars mostly chalk this up to the wildly creative imaginations of inquisitors under stress or under influence of strong wine. But back then, it was deadly serious. You stop beside a gnarled tree whose bark has grown in swirling patterns. Beneath it, half buried in moss, is what looks like a small stone marker. You lean closer. There's no writing, just a carved outline, rough, weathered, unmistakably feline. A grave, maybe, or maybe just a tribute. Either way, it feels like this place remembers. Cats, as you've gathered, are everywhere in these stories. But their human counterparts, the accused, the lonely, the eccentric, were rarely so lucky. In 16th century Germany, a woman named Walpurga Hausmannen confessed under extreme torture to transforming into a cat to attend witches' meetings. She was burned at the stake. The same fate met many others who were simply a little strange, too quiet, too outspoken, too fond of their cats. In Finland, some old court records show women claiming their cats could speak sometimes in dreams, sometimes in riddles. The line between metaphor and confession blurs dangerously in those pages. Historians still argue whether such statements were literal beliefs or desperate attempts to make sense of loneliness. You exhale slowly, watching the mist rise from your breath. It feels heavy with memory. And yet, cats remained. Even as they were blamed, they were fed. Even as they were feared, they were followed. Maybe that's the magic of them. Not the spells or shape-shifting or whispered incantations, but the simple fact that they endured. Because cats didn't change for us. They didn't bend to our paranoia or dance to the rhythm of our fire-lit fears. They stayed themselves, independent, mysterious, slightly judgmental, and somehow that annoyed us more than anything else. You walk on the cat, just ahead now, tail flicking in time with your heartbeat. It pauses beside a pool of water, a slow, shallow thing, fed by a trickle from the hill. You crouch beside it, see your reflection beside the cat's. For a moment, the image blurs. You blink. Just two travelers, you remind yourself. Nothing more. But a part of you wonders how many others saw something similar in the past and came to very different conclusions. Not just, that's a cat, but that's her. That's the woman who cursed my crop, who looked at me too long, who laughed when I fell. That's the witch. You reach out. The water ripples. The reflection breaks. And when it settles again, it's just you and the cat, watching you with calm, eternal patience. You smile. Maybe that's the biggest mystery of all. Not what cats are, but what they make us see in ourselves. The path curves deeper into the woods now, and you follow your footsteps hushed by a carpet of damp pine needles. Above the trees, lean in close their branches, whispering secrets in a language too old to translate. The black cat walks just ahead, silent as breath, occasionally glancing back, not to check on you, but to make sure you're still paying attention. Because tonight, you're not just walking through woods. You're walking through the parts of history that textbooks like to skip, the parts filled with whispers, suspicions, and very bad hygiene. You're walking through the smell. Oh yes, the smell. Because as beautiful as the folklore around cats and witches can sometimes seem the real medieval world that surrounded them. Let's just say it wasn't built for your nostrils. Picture this. You're living in a 14th century village. It's a chill morning. The rooster crowed 2 hours ago. You've already tossed slop to the pigs and tried to convince your child not to lick a frog again. So far, so normal. But then you step outside and the air hits you. There's the smell of smoke, of course. Wood smoke from hearths and coal fires. Comforting, sure, until it's layered with the reek of manure, both fresh and marinated. The streets aren't paved after all, and animals don't care about zoning laws. There's also the fishmonger down the lane who apparently never heard of a closing time or a rinse cycle. And someone nearby has been boiling cabbage since dawn, which, if you've ever smelled that at full power, is enough to make your soul wrinkle. And then there's the tanner's shop. Dear sweet history, the tanner, turning animal hides into usable leather, required soaking them in urine, human urine, collected daily, sometimes by children. Pea-fetcher was a real job. Historians still argue whether it paid in coin or trauma. You take a slow breath, now grateful that your current walk through this dreamlike forest is a scent-free experience. But your medieval counterpart, they lived in a world where even perfume was usually just a pouch of herbs stuffed in your sleeve. Nice rosemary, my lady. Why, thank you. It masks my fear and goats. Cats surprisingly did okay in this olfactory chaos. Their grooming habits made them cleaner than most humans. While the local lord might bathe once a season, if he was feeling decadent, cats were licking themselves clean daily. No wonder they were seen as suspicious. Why is it always so clean witchcraft? In towns, cats gravitated toward barns, bakeries, and the warm nooks of apothecaries. They curled beneath herbal shelves and next to fire-heated stones. Their presence brought a small sense of balance, a quiet control over the rodent chaos that otherwise reigned. But not everyone appreciated them. Remember that you're in a time when superstition wrapped itself tightly around everything. If a cat darted across your path, omen. If it hissed at your child, curse. If it sat staring at you with judgmental eyes, obviously an agent of Satan. Of course, historians now understand that cats were probably reacting to the overwhelming smells of rot sickness and fear. A person with the plague smells different. A cat would know. And still the idea persisted that cats weren't just witnesses to evil, they were evil. This belief led to bizarre remedies. In some villages, people thought nailing a dead cat above a doorway would ward off witches. Others believed burying a cat in the foundation of a house brought luck, or at least protected against hauntings. Because nothing says welcome home like feline remains in the walls. Even royalty wasn't immune to cat-related fears. Pope Gregory IX once issued a papal bull, the delightfully titled Vox in Rama, claiming that black cats were linked to devil worship. This sparked mass killings of cats across Europe. Again, fewer cats equals more rats equals more plague. Math was not their strong suit. You pause at a fork in the trail. The cat takes the left path without hesitation. You follow. The air grows cooler here, tinged with moisture. A stream burbles nearby, and your footsteps crunch softly over wet leaves. It's peaceful, almost too peaceful. In medieval villages, this kind of quiet would have been suspicious. No bells ringing, no horses clopping, no shouting merchants. Clearly, something's wrong. Maybe someone forgot to feed the town crier. You pass under an arch formed by leaning trees and emerge into a clearing ringed with wild flowers and stones. In the center is a flat-topped boulder, weathered and smooth, like something once used for rituals, or maybe just communal laundry. Often the same thing, honestly. You sit catching your breath, and you think about the women who might have stood in a place like this 5 centuries ago. Women accused not because they practiced magic, but because they smelled different, or owned a cat, or lived alone, or said no too often. And you wonder how many cats sat by them through it all. The trials, the whispers, the cold nights. Not casting spells, just being there. Maybe that's the quiet tragedy of it all. The thing people feared, this unholy bond between cat and woman, wasn't about curses or potions or flying through the night. It was about companionship, about something loyal and quiet and warm in a world that smelled awful and judged too easily. You reach down to pet your shadowy guide, but of course it's already walking away again. Typical. But you follow. Of course you do. Because no matter how much the world stinks, literally or otherwise, some mysteries are worth chasing, even if they come with claws. The woods are thinning now. Not much, but enough that you can sense a shift. The canopy no longer blocks out all light. The sky above you is veiled in clouds, not stars, a soft gray glow that feels neither night nor dawn. Just a pause between the two. You follow the black cat across a shallow rise, the earth soft beneath your feet, as if absorbing every step. Up ahead, something rises in the distance. At first, it looks like an outcrop of stone, but as you draw closer, you see the jagged silhouette of wooden beams, collapsed walls, slanted roofs, and broken frames. A ruin, but not a castle. It's too small. No towers, no battlements, just a house, maybe a cottage once, or a healer's hut, or maybe, just maybe, a witch's dwelling. You walk slower now, not from fear exactly, but reverence, as if the place itself is breathing, waiting to be noticed again. And while we're here, hovering between the crumbling rafters of the past, it's worth asking, why were women with cats so often linked to magic? Why not women with goats or chickens? The answer is slippery, because unlike goats or chickens, who are loud, needy, and make messes you can't ignore, cats are quiet. They vanish. They appear where they shouldn't. They see you when you think you're alone, and they don't care who you are. In a world obsessed with hierarchy, obedience, and predictable roles, that kind of behavior is frankly unsettling. Cats didn't do obedience. Neither did certain women, especially older women. Widows, herbalists, midwives, women who lived on the edges geographically, socially, economically. These women often kept cats for practical reasons: pest control, warmth, companionship. But to others, their isolation made them suspicious. If she's not married, what's wrong with her? If she doesn't attend church, what's she hiding? If her cat stares at me every morning on the way to the bakery, is that a curse? Historians still argue whether this fear of cats was driven more by genuine belief or by political control. In truth, it was probably both. Fear is a convenient tool, and labeling someone as other is an easy way to keep the center of power undisturbed. So, cats became symbols, living metaphors, and the women who loved them, they became scapegoats. You reach the doorway of the ruined house. The wood is soft with rot, but still standing in places. The frame is tilted like a tired shoulder leaning toward memory. Inside it smells of moss and time. The hearth is still visible, a half circle of stone blackened by old fire. Beside it lies a rusted pot, a shattered bowl, a wooden spoon with the handle bitten clean through. Rat or wolf, or maybe just the years. On one wall, there's a shelf, empty now, but you can imagine it, lined with jars, dried herbs, bundles of lavender and rosemary, mushrooms maybe, bits of quartz. Nothing magical, nothing sinister, just practical. Just enough to keep a household running when no one else is around. You imagine the woman who lived here. Maybe her name was Annalisa, or Marta, or no one remembers. She might have worn rough linen and kept her hair braided back. Maybe she hummed while she worked. Maybe her knees ached in winter, and she spoke to her cat more than she spoke to people. Not because she was a witch, but because her cat was the only one who listened without interrupting. And one day, after a bad harvest, or a child's fever, or a neighbor's envy, someone pointed at her and said, "She's not right." And someone else said, "She's got a cat." And that was enough. Because in a world full of unknowns, humans like to explain things, even badly, especially badly. The black cat jumps onto a broken beam and sits, tail curled, neatly around its feet. Its eyes are glowing faintly in the dimness, like coals waiting to spark. It stares at you. You stare back. And you think, what did it feel like to sit here beside the fire and know the world outside thought you dangerous, not powerful, not wise, just dangerous? Maybe it was lonely. Maybe it was freeing. The cat blinks slowly, as if to say both. You nod, barely, and for a moment it feels like the air inside this ruin is thicker. Like the walls remember the laughter, the tea, the quiet mornings, the grief. There's something sacred about forgotten places. They don't demand attention. They wait, patient as cats. Outside, the breeze picks up stirring leaves into slow spirals. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once low and sleepy. You step back out, leaving the ruin behind, though something about it stays with you, like ash, in the folds of your coat. As you return to the path, you think about how many stories were lost like this. Not burned, not destroyed, just unspoken, unwritten, and the cats, they remain. Like living bookmarks tucked between pages of a book no one finished. But you're here now, and maybe, just maybe, you'll remember. The forest thickens again as you walk, branches threading themselves overhead in patterns too tangled to decode. The cat pads silently beside you, now no longer leading, just keeping pace. A companion, not a guide. The two of you are headed somewhere neither of you fully understands, and that's somehow okay. Up ahead, a soft flicker of movement, not light exactly, more like shimmer, like the air itself hiccuped. As you step closer, you realize it's a clearing, ringed with standing stones, tall, weathered, and covered in moss. They lean in different directions, like a group of old men caught mid-argument. In the center, a single flat slab, low and wide, worn smooth by time and wind, and probably more than one superstitious ritual. You don't sit on it. That would feel rude. Instead, you circle the stone slowly, feeling the energy of the place. You imagine this spot as it might have been centuries ago, under a full moon, the community gathered in heavy cloaks, breath fogging the air, someone chanting off-key. Not magic, really, just ritual, the comfort of repetition when the world makes no sense. It's in places like this that stories take shape. Myths are born. Warnings become legends. And one story in particular seems to echo louder than most the witch's familiar. Now the idea of a familiar might sound cozy to modern ears, like a magical pet with an Etsy shop and great taste in crystals. But in its original form, the concept was less adorable. In early modern Europe, especially during the height of the witch trials, roughly 15th to 17th centuries, a familiar was considered a demonic entity. Not just a helper, but a full-on evil sidekick. Familiars could take many forms: frogs, ferrets, birds, but cats, especially black ones, were the A-listers of this dark little roster. Familiars were said to assist witches in spell work, deliver messages, or even suckle blood from hidden teats on the witch's body. Yes, that was a real accusation. Historians still argue whether this bizarre fixation was born of paranoia, misogyny, or just extremely weird medical misunderstandings. Likely, it was all three wrapped in a tortilla of mass hysteria. In English witch trial records, you'll find testimonies filled with strange, almost theatrical details. She sent her familiar Vinegar Tom, a gray cat, to torment me, says one neighbor. I saw her speaking to a spirit in the shape of a black cat named Pie Wacket, claims another. And rather than question the oddity of naming a demonic cat Pie Wacket, the judges just took notes. These names, so quaint now, were deadly then. They turned cats into accomplices and women into criminals. Many accused witches were elderly or poor. Often they were midwives or herbalists. Often they were women who didn't have the protection of a husband or son. And all too often they had pets. Because of course they did. In a time when survival meant bartering, foraging, and praying, the fever passed, why wouldn't you want a quiet companion? Something warm, something that kills mice and doesn't gossip. But if your neighbor's child got sick, if a storm ruined the barley, if your cat stared a little too long, well then you must be feeding it your blood. You glance at the black cat beside you. It licks one paw with deliberate slowness, utterly unbothered by centuries of false accusations. Honestly, it's kind of impressive. In Scotland, the familiar took on even more spectral forms. Some believed they could vanish into smoke or slip between cracks in walls. In one 17th century case, a woman was accused of summoning her familiar through a keyhole. Historians debate whether this was metaphor, exaggeration, or someone who really didn't understand how keys work. But there was always the same pattern: a woman alone or with a cat, an unexplained misfortune, then a trial. And once the trial began, logic left the building. Witch tests were a blend of superstition and sadism. There were swimming trials where suspected witches were tossed into rivers. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, innocent. Congratulations, you've just been vindicated by drowning. There were searches for witches' marks, usually small scars, or moles, which were declared teats, used to feed familiars. Midwives were called to inspect. Cats were confiscated. Torture was legal. And the cats, they didn't get trials. They were killed outright, burned, or drowned alongside their accused owners. Because if you're hunting witches, you might as well murder their pets too. You sit at the edge of the stone ring now, staring at the moss beneath your fingers. It's soft, damp, real, and yet it feels like sitting inside a story that no one fully finished. Not all of Europe bought into the idea of familiars, of course. In Mediterranean regions like Italy or Spain, beliefs around witchcraft were different. Less demonology, more folk magic. Cats still held mixed reputations, but they weren't always equated with Satan's interns. And in other cultures outside the bounds of Europe, cats were revered. In ancient Egypt, they were protectors. In Japan, symbols of luck. In parts of the Islamic world, companions of the Prophet. It was only in a narrow slice of place and time that cats became criminalized by association. And yet that slice left a long shadow. You exhale slowly, the breath fogging before you. The cat curls up beside you, now a small warm weight against your leg. And you think not about spells or devils, but about loneliness. How dangerous it is. How it makes people easy to blame, easy to forget. But a cat always remembers. You rise slowly, brushing moss from your palms. The cat stretches beside you, arching its back in that luxurious way only cats can like. It has a full day of lounging ahead, and not, centuries of misunderstood mythology behind it. The standing stones remain silent behind you, solemn sentinels of half-remembered rituals and crimes of belief. You step back into the forest, the path winding deeper, darker, softer. Branches knit themselves into archways overhead, and your footsteps crunch against fallen leaves, some fresh, some ancient. The kind of place where time slips a little, where memory walks beside you in silence. And as you move through the trees, you find yourself thinking not about the witches, but the people who hunted them. Not kings or inquisitors, not even the angry mob, but the everyday folks, the neighbors, the friends, the gossips. Why would someone point and say, "That woman is a witch"? Sometimes it was fear, but sometimes it was power. You pass a gnarled tree, its bark split in two, like a twisted mouth. Moss grows inside the crack as if nature is trying to stitch the wound shut. You pause and look into that green seam as if it might whisper something, but it just breathes, like everything here. And so we come to an uncomfortable truth about cat burning and witch hunting. It wasn't always about belief. Sometimes it was just politics. In medieval France, for example, there was an official royal edict. Yes, an actual law that encouraged the killing of black cats. King Louis XI, no less. Why? Because cats were supposedly tied to sorcery, and sorcery was tied to rebellion. Burning a cat wasn't just superstition, it was statecraft, a way to signal loyalty, to purge the kingdom of suspicious elements, to control. In some towns, this manifested as annual festivals, mock religious processions, where live cats were tied up in sacks or baskets and tossed into bonfires, bells ringing, people cheering. It sounds medieval, and it was, but not in some dusty, ancient way. This happened into the 17th century. You think of the last time you saw a cat curled up in a sunbeam, purring softly, barely aware of the world. And now imagine dragging that same creature into the town square in front of children and lighting a fire. It's more than cruelty. It's choreography. Historians still argue whether these rituals were rooted in folk beliefs or carefully constructed social theater. But either way, the result was the same. A cat burned a community unified by spectacle and a chilling reminder of who was and wasn't safe. And don't forget, this wasn't just France. In Ypres, Belgium, yes, the same Ypres that would later be shell-shocked in World War I, there was a tradition called the Kattenstoet, the cat parade. Townsfolk would throw cats from the Belfry Tower, alive. Today the festival still exists, but now the cats are plush toys. People wear whiskered hats and parade in honor of felines rather than against them. It's adorable, but the past it masks, not so much. Even in England, cats weren't safe. During Guy Fawkes Night in the 1600s, people sometimes stuffed effigies with cats so their screams would make the burning seem more real. You'd think pretending to incinerate a traitor would be enough, but apparently it needed sound effects. You glance at the black cat following you now. It blinks slowly again, that feline nonchalance layered over centuries of historical trauma. If cats could roll their eyes, this one probably would. But here's the twist in the tale, the Great Plague. Specifically, the bubonic one. Yes, that plague. The 14th century superstar of misery. Black Death, 1347, 1351. Killed a third of Europe. And here's where it gets ironic. During those centuries, when cats were vilified and slaughtered as witches' companions, rat populations soared. Surprise. No cats equals more rats equals more fleas equals more plague. Whoops. It turns out cats weren't agents of Satan. They were public health infrastructure. Furry, judgy, highly efficient exterminators. But by the time people figured that out, it was a little late. And even when cats were invited back into homes, they didn't come with apologies. No one said, "Sorry, we threw your ancestors off towers." They just started letting them into barns again, quietly, like the world had collectively decided to move on. And cats, they moved on too, because revenge is not a feline trait. Smugness, yes. Grudges, occasionally. But revenge, that's a human thing. You follow the path now as it narrows between two massive oaks. Their roots form natural steps, and the cat leaps ahead, landing gracefully on the other side. You, less gracefully, step over them with a wobble. Beyond, the air grows colder. The trees are taller here. The sun, though you can't see it, feels far away. You begin to notice faces in the bark. Not literal ones, just the kind of knots and splits that your mind can't help but turn into eyes and noses and mouths. The kind of forest where stories whisper themselves into shape without asking permission. It's easy to imagine here a woman walking with her cat, a basket of herbs over one arm, and whispers trailing behind her like smoke. She talks to her cat, they'd say. She walks at night. She never had children, and that's all it would take. Not because she did anything wrong, but because someone else needed her to be wrong, to blame, to burn. The wind picks up rustling through the leaves like a quiet warning. The cat, undisturbed, walks on. And do you, curious, tired, somehow comforted, follow? The forest thins as you walk the trees, stepping back politely, letting more sky in. Above you, clouds shuffle like sleepy sheep, their bellies brushed with fading gold. It might be dusk or dawn or some ancient hour in between. Time doesn't mean much here. You've left the village, the square, the tower behind. What remains is softer, quieter, and as always, the cat leads on. You notice now that you're ascending. The path angles upward, gentle but steady, and soon you're climbing a hill dusted with wild thyme and those tiny blue flowers no one ever remembers the names of. The air smells clean, like earth and old sun, a good place to remember something difficult. Because this next part of the story, it's personal. Not to you, not exactly, but to anyone who's ever been judged for being different, for dressing the wrong way, for saying too much or too little, for loving solitude, for loving cats. At the height of the witch craze, Europe, 16th and 17th centuries, accusations didn't require proof. They required suspicion, and often a cat was enough to tip the scales. In Essex, England, a woman named Elizabeth Clark was arrested in 1645. She was elderly disabled and lived alone with her cat. During her interrogation by none other than the infamous Matthew Hopkins, self-proclaimed witch finder general, she confessed to having several familiars, one of which was a gray cat named Holt. The cat, she claimed, drank her blood and whispered to her at night. Now we could pause here and say, clearly Elizabeth was pressured. And yes, historians still argue whether her confession came from torture, senility, or a desperate bid to end her suffering. Probably all three. But what's more chilling is what happened next. Other women were accused simply for being near her. Guilt, like a contagion, spread by proximity. And if they had pets, even worse. You reach the crest of the hill. Below the land unfolds like a woven rug, patchwork fields, crooked streams, tiny cottages, hunched together for warmth. It's beautiful, yes, but also oppressive. Small towns watch their own. The cat sits beside you, tail curled neatly around its paws. It blinks once, slowly. You can almost hear the question, how many of us were burned because someone wanted our house, or feared our silence, or didn't like how we brewed tea? Because here's the inconvenient truth, the cat didn't make you a witch. But owning a cat made it harder to prove you weren't one. Cats roamed freely in medieval Europe. They weren't quite pets, as we know them. More like tolerated freelancers. Good for barns, bad for superstition. Black ones especially were treated with deep unease. Their sleek coat and glowing eyes felt otherworldly. Church sermons warned against Satan's creatures. Children were told not to feed them. Farmers sometimes drowned kittens born with dark fur. And yet, people kept them quietly, lovingly. Because for every peasant who feared a black cat's curse, there was another who tucked it into their cloak for warmth. For every priest who ranted about the devil's beasts, a miller somewhere was secretly glad his grain wasn't full of mouse droppings. People are contradictory like that. They love and fear the same thing, sometimes in the same breath. You begin walking again, the cat trotting ahead like it knows a shortcut. The hill drops down the other side into a shallow vale where ruins hide among the tall grass. Stone walls, some intact, some tumbled, mark the skeleton of an old chapel. The roof is gone, but ivy now serves as shingles, and birds roost in the corners. Inside the ruins you find the remnants of a graveyard. Faint stones, their inscriptions long worn away. A few are shaped like crosses, others like crooked teeth. And there, near one edge, a circle of stones marks something different. A memory too fragile for a name. Maybe this is where someone laid flowers for the last time. Maybe this is where someone buried their familiar. Because in all the court records and trial transcripts, we rarely find what happened after. After the flames, after the screams, after the judges packed up and left town. But we know grief lingered. We know that daughters kept their mother's combs, that friends whispered her name only in safe places, that someone picked up the cat and carried it home, feeding it under the bed, away from suspicious eyes. The cat sniffs the air now, stepping into the ruined chapel like it's been here before. Maybe it has. Maybe it remembers more than you do, because cats carry memory in their bones. And in those bones, stories, scratched into the marrow, purring beneath the silence. One such story, a woman named Alice Keitler in Kilkenny, Ireland, accused of witchcraft in 1324. She was wealthy, widowed 4 times, and had a loyal black cat. Her servant, Petronilla, was tortured until she confessed that Alice used the cat in rituals, summoning demons and poisoning husbands. Alice escaped. Petronilla didn't. She was burned alive, the first in Ireland to suffer that fate for witchcraft. And the cat, no one recorded its end. It simply disappears from the record, as they often do, because cats don't write diaries. They just watch. You sit on a fallen stone, the cat curling up beside you, pressing its warm side against your hip. The sun dips lower now, washing the vale in copper light. Shadows stretch like fingers. Time slows, and you wonder, not for the first time, how many of these ruins were built from fear. How many graves hold not just bodies, but stories the world wasn't brave enough to tell. The cat purrs softly. You close your eyes, and for a moment, history breathes with you. When your eyes open again, the sky has shifted to a hazy violet, that soft hour when the world exhales, and even the wind seems to pause. You rise slowly, brushing the chill from your arms. The cat stretches beside you, one leg out back, arched tail high, and without a glance it begins walking again. You follow, down a narrow path, now one carved by time and not people. Ferns crowd in, close brushing against your legs. Somewhere ahead, water gurgles softly, maybe a spring, or maybe a place where stories flow more freely. Because now you're entering the part of history people tend to skip. The strange, the tangled, the utterly domestic. You see in every village where someone was accused of witchcraft for owning a cat, there was always someone who quietly fed that cat afterward, who slipped it scraps, who let it sleep in the barn again once the fires went out. Cats, after all, are survivors. And so were their people. Take, for example, the peculiar story of Anna Ebeler, a 17th century German herbalist who lived alone in the woods and was known for healing fevers using wild thyme and spiderweb poultices. She had a one-eyed cat named Kruta, which means toad, because medieval pet names were apparently very literal. Kruta was said to follow Anna everywhere, including to the village market, riding in the folds of her apron. People gossiped. They said the cat whispered in her ear, that it knew when people were about to die, that it ate mice from the church floor, but never left droppings. Suspicious, right? Eventually, Anna was brought to trial. And here's where it gets interesting. Instead of accusing her of direct witchcraft, the court focused on the cat. They debated at length whether Kruta was a demon in disguise, a bewitched animal, or simply too clever by half. Historians still argue whether this shift toward prosecuting the familiar rather than the person signaled a change in belief or just legal desperation. Either way, Kruta was seized and examined by clergy. The records note that he scratched one of the priests and urinated on the floor, which honestly sounds like the most cat-like response to injustice ever recorded. In the end, Anna was fined, but not executed. Kruta was banished from the village. He reportedly lived out his days in a nearby monastery, stealing fish and sleeping in the choir loft. You smile at the thought, because for every terrifying tale of persecution, there is a Kruta, a survivor, a tail flicking defiantly against the tide of fear. The path ends at a stream. Water slips over smooth stones, clear and cold. The cat dips a paw and then licks it delicately, as if it belongs to some elegant duchess and not the centuries of superstition you've just walked through. You crouch beside the stream, cupping your hands into the current. The water stings, but in that bracing, clarifying way, like history asking you to stay awake just a little longer, because next you'll want to remember the witches who fought back. They didn't all go quietly. In Scandinavia, particularly during the 1660s, a series of trials unfolded that historians now refer to as the Finnmark witch panic. Entire fishing communities in what's now northern Norway were caught up in a frenzy of accusation and trial. And in one notable case, a woman named Maren Olsdotter was sentenced to death not only for consorting with demons, but for sending a cat made of snow to spy on the priest. Let that sit for a second. A cat made of snow, because clearly, if you were going to battle evil, you'd send a cold, silent, perfectly camouflaged feline Marin insisted that the cat vanished before it could be caught, which either makes her one of the earliest fantasy writers on record, or a woman being incredibly sarcastic in the face of death. Either way, the image stuck. You can almost see it now, a white blur across a frozen fjord tail, flicking behind it, no paw prints left behind. A spy made of storm. And again, what's striking here isn't the magic, it's the logic. Even in a court of law, cats were the proof, because they were liminal, neither wild nor fully tame, neither holy nor damned, just feline. And that alone was enough to make them dangerous. You sit now on a mossy stone, the stream whispering beside you. The cat curls at your feet, its eyes half-lidded. And you wonder, how did we go from revering cats in ancient Egypt to tossing them off belfries and blaming them for winter storms? The easy answer is religion. The complex answer is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of women, fear of what you can't control, and cats, being, let's face it, utterly uncontrollable, became tiny, furry scapegoats. But they never stopped watching, and they never stopped returning. There's something deeply comforting about that. The idea that no matter how many times they were vilified, cats just kept showing up. In barns, in back alleys, on the laps of widows and queens alike. They endure. And maybe that's the lesson here. Maybe the reason people feared cats wasn't because they were evil, but because they were free. The cat lifts its head, suddenly ears twitching towards something in the trees. You hear nothing, but then again your hearing doesn't reach into the past quite the same way. Still you feel it, that presence, that weight of memory. And as the cat stands stretching again, you rise with it, ready to keep walking, because this story isn't done yet. Not even close. You walk beneath branches, now arched high, like cathedral ceilings, woven from bark and shadow. The cat pads a head-tail, upright, slipping easily between shafts of light and lacy foliage. The path narrows to little more than memory. Ferns rustle at your calves. Distant birds call as if rehearsing a forgotten hymn. There's something ceremonial about this stretch, like the forest itself is waiting for you to understand something important, something quiet. Because while the flames and trials and bans are the parts people write down, the living with fear is quieter, longer, and rarely told. Imagine being a woman in 15th century France. You're not wealthy. You sell herbs at the edge of the market and live alone with 3 cats, Tabac Grisette, and a ginger tom called Miel. They aren't magic. They don't fly. They mostly bring you dead sparrows and knock over your soup, but they keep you company, and they never ask you to smile. Your neighbors call you La Vieille Fille behind your back, the old maid. One winter, a local child falls ill, fever, rashes, fits of coughing. No one knows what caused it, but someone remembers your cat scratching the child's door weeks ago. A whisper grows. You suddenly find your stall in the market empty. People stop meeting your eyes. One night you wake up to stones thrown at your shutters, and you realize your cats have made you visible, too visible. It's not dramatic. It's not fast. You aren't arrested or dragged to court. But you know. You know to keep your head down, to keep your voice low, to tie a ribbon to each cat's tail so they look cute and less suspicious, to never visit the sick again, even if you have the remedy. Historians call these moments microhistories, the small, unrecorded lives that shape the fears and rules we later see in textbooks. And they argue often with raised voices and frayed nerves about how much of that silence was choice and how much was survival. You emerge into a clearing where sunlight pours down like honey, thick and golden. The cat leaps onto a fallen log and turns to wait. Its eyes say, "This is where people learn to pretend," because not every cat-owning woman was defiant. Most weren't. Most just adapted. They hid their affection, called their cats by dog names, gave them bland, saintly labels like Marie or Paul. They tucked them inside baskets and called them strays. They murmured prayers over their meals while sneaking scraps to the shadows. Survival is not always a sword. Sometimes it's a whisper. And even now, some of the oddest folklore echoes this balance between hiding and claiming. In Polish tradition, for instance, there's the tale of the kot czarownicy, a witch's cat that guards the forest's edge. It's said to appear only when you're lost, eyes glowing red, and if you offer it a bit of bread and honey, it'll lead you out safely. But if you offend it, you'll wander in circles until dawn, feet blistered trees, laughing. Curiously, the kot czarownicy is not evil. Not exactly. It's clever, proud, protective. And if it chooses to help you, you're never to speak of it. Again, the cat remains liminal. Not savior, not villain. Just present and deeply aware of your choices. You sit now at the edge of the clearing back against a tree whose roots rise like old bones. The air smells of moss and pine sap. The cat nuzzles your ankle once, then curls beside your foot-tail, flicking like a metronome. You think of all the women who must have whispered apologies into fur. "I'm sorry, little one. I can't call you by name anymore. Not in public. And of all the cats who didn't mind, who came anyway." In Brittany, one such tale survives, barely. A girl named Maëlle, accused of being fey-touched, was cast from her village after a cow died unexpectedly. She took with her a blind cat who followed her everywhere, nose bumping gently against her heels. They say she built a home in the woods and lived there alone for 40 years, never speaking to another human again. But she spoke to the cat. She sang to it. And when she died, villagers found her curled in bed with the creature still resting on her chest. One witness swore the cat blinked once at them, then disappeared. Others say it walked straight into the fire and was never seen again. Either way, no one rebuilt her hut. Because cats, it seemed, kept secrets, and people were afraid of the kinds of secrets that purred. The cat beside you stretches claws, flexing gently into the earth. It blinks at you slowly. There's no rush here, no grand conclusion, only the growing awareness that history isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a soft shadow at your heels, a purr in the dark, a gaze that says, I remember. You rise again and follow. Because this walk isn't just through time, it's through memory. And memory has claws. You step lightly now, as if the forest floor might crumble underfoot, though it doesn't. It holds you. Soft pine needles cushion each step, muffling sound, drawing you deeper into a calm that hums like a lullaby from the earth itself. The cat glides ahead of you, unbothered, perfectly balanced its tail, the only thing that betrays motion. This next part of the story isn't frightening, but it is strange and a little itchy, not because of superstition or scandal, but because of the fleas. You're about to enter the scratchier side of cat history. Medieval towns, you see, were not known for their hygiene. Waste disposal systems ranged from toss it out the window to let it pile up until it moves on its own. People rarely bathed for fear that hot water would open the pores to disease. Clothes were rarely washed. And fleas. Fleas were the landlords. Everyone had them. Men, women, children. The occasional monk who thought abstinence would protect him from biting insects. It didn't. Enter the cat. Now cats weren't domesticated for cuddles. That came much later. Originally, their value was practical. They killed rats. They stalked mice. And yes, they helped control the spread of fleas, or at least kept their carriers in check, which is ironic considering how often they were blamed for plagues. Historians still argue whether the mass culling of cats during the Black Death worsened the spread of disease by allowing rodent populations to explode unchecked. One camp says, of course it did, duh. Another insists the connection is overblown. And in between, there's a small but vocal third group that just wants everyone to acknowledge how resilient rats are. But what most agree on is this people started fearing cats right when they needed them most. During outbreaks of plague, rumors spread that cats were the devil's messengers, that their glowing eyes could curse the healthy, that witches used them to spread disease, slipping them through keyholes at night. Yes, really, through keyholes. The logic was, if a spirit can travel through a lock, surely a witch's cat can. So cats were killed, not just the black ones, all of them, burned in baskets, thrown from towers, tied in sacks, and drowned. Towns held public executions of felines to purify the streets, and the rats rejoiced. You pause here at the edge of a shallow creek. The cat dips a paw into the water, watching the ripples fan outward. Its ears twitch as a beetle skates past, oblivious to its near-death moment. You imagine a village square, smoke in the air, children huddled behind their mothers, a cart piled with squirming burlap sacks. You hear a priest shout something about sin and pestilence, and you wonder how many of those onlookers woke the next morning to the sound of rat claws in their cupboards. The cat steps over the water. You follow. There's a strange sense of justice here, history showing its teeth, because for all the fear and hatred cats received, they left behind fewer messes than people ever did. In fact, some medieval manuscripts include peculiar illustrations, marginalia, of cats relieving themselves in oddly human ways. One shows a cat using a chamber pot. Another, more confusingly, depicts a cat wearing a small cape and ringing a bell. Was it satire, a prayer for cleanliness, or simply a bored monk doodling his frustration? Historians still debate. You chuckle, picturing that monk scratching his head, eyes red from copying Latin text for 16 hours straight, thinking, you know what this manuscript needs? A cat pooping on a scroll. Because even then, people understood that cats weren't just useful. They were funny, a little chaotic, a little sacred, a lot indifferent. And that very indifference became part of their mystique. There's a reason why sailors brought cats aboard their ships, not just to catch rats, but as omens. A cat who curled near the bow meant calm seas. A cat who hid below deck, trouble ahead. In fact, cats were often more trusted than the captain when it came to weather predictions. And while your average peasant might fear a witch's familiar, a seafaring crew would fight to keep their ship's cat safe, fed, and well-groomed. It's a curious contradiction. Land dwellers feared cats for being unnatural, while sailors revered them for being in tune with nature. The cat beside you hops onto a mossy boulder, tail swishing. It doesn't look at you, but you sense the glance anyway. The silent reminder. Perception is power. You remember the story of Trim, the ship's cat, of Matthew Flinders, the British navigator who circumnavigated Australia in the early 1800s. Trim was adored, fed well, and even given a plaque after his death. Meanwhile, on land, people were still accusing cats of being shapeshifters who danced with devils in the moonlight. You feel it now, that tension. The same animal, two completely different myths, two parallel truths, depending not on the cat's actions, but on who was watching and what they feared. You sit again, this time on a warm stone halfway buried in the earth. The cat curls at your side. A breeze moves through the trees. You smell mint pine and a hint of damp fur. Maybe the fleas weren't the worst part, you think. Maybe the worst part was how quickly people forgot why they loved cats to begin with. Or maybe it's just that history doesn't always learn its own lessons. Not quickly, anyway. The cat yawns, a pink tongue flashing briefly before vanishing again behind sharp teeth and sleepy eyes. You rest your hand gently near its back, not petting, not claiming, just offering. And it stays, which is enough. For now. You find yourself walking through mist, now not quite fog, but a silvery haze that drapes everything like gauze. The trees have grown tall and thin, their trunks pale and smooth, their branches reaching like fingers into a sky you can't quite see. The cat's silhouette flits ahead occasionally, vanishing entirely, until it reappears, just in time to remind you who's really leading this stroll through time. This is the part of the journey where the lines between myth and medicine get fuzzy, like the cat itself. Soft edges, uncertain origins, and an unfortunate obsession with bodily fluids. Because tonight you're going to learn about cat-based cures. Oh yes, people once believed that cats weren't just magical companions or rodent hunters, but tiny living apothecaries, full of medicinal energy, or, more accurately, full of things you could use for medicine, whether the cat agreed or not. Now brace yourself gently. Nothing gruesome is coming. No cats are harmed in this particular stretch of history. But your gag reflex, well, let's just say you may never look at feline fur the same way again. Let's start with the medieval cat ointment. This was, according to various herbalists' notebooks, a paste made by rendering the fat of a cat, usually mixed with herbs and oils, and applied to aching joints or diseased skin. The belief was that cats, being supple and stealthy, held an essence of flexibility. So, applying a salve made from cat fat might return that flexibility to the afflicted body. Modern science has, of course, dismissed this entirely, but at the time people swore by it. They claimed it soothed arthritis, eased back pain, possibly made you more nimble on stairs, though that was likely just the placebo effect paired with a warm compress. Then there's the infamous cat breath cure. During certain fevers, particularly those involving hallucinations, it was thought that the breath of a healthy cat might counteract the imbalance of humors in the body. So, what did they do? They placed a calm cat on the patient's chest and waited. To be fair, this isn't the worst idea. The warmth and purring vibrations could be comforting, even soothing. Today's studies suggest that a cat's purr, usually between 25 and 150 hertz, can promote healing in soft tissue and bones. So those medieval healers may have stumbled onto something without quite understanding why it worked. Historians still argue whether this counts as genuine proto-medicine or just another form of elaborate cuddling. You pause on the path now. A wooden sign leans against a nearby tree, weathered and illegible. The cat hops onto it, tail flicking, and stares into the distance as though expecting someone or something to arrive. You half expect a medieval apothecary to come tumbling out of the woods, clutching a scroll and shouting about cat urine. Because, yes, that was a thing too. It was believed that a mixture of cat urine and ash could cure ringworm. Why, no one's entirely sure. Possibly because of its ammonia content, possibly because desperate people will try anything. This was an era where moldy bread was applied to wounds. Penicillin's clumsy ancestor leeches were sold at market stalls, and people genuinely thought basil could grow better if cursed at every morning. So, a little feline pee, practically mainstream. Let's not forget the cat and candle trick. This involved tying a ribbon to a cat's tail, lighting a candle, and performing a slow circle around a sick person while chanting. The idea was that the cat would absorb or confuse the illness long enough for the patient to recover. It didn't work, but it did create a lot of angry cats and very few intact curtains. You move forward again, the mist thinning slightly, revealing a low stone wall ahead. The cat leaps atop it, gracefully, balanced tail curved like a question mark. And here comes a particularly strange moment in medical folklore: cat's eyes. It was believed in some corners of early modern Europe that staring into a cat's eyes could cleanse one's vision. This was probably due to their clarity and reflective shine, especially at night. Some even believed that touching your eyes after handling a cat's whiskers could align the sight. You may be thinking, but wasn't this also the period when people thought looking at a cat too long could give you the plague? Yes. Welcome to history, where everything is true and none of it is reliable. But perhaps the oddest of all remedies involved something called felinum tincture. It was listed in a few 17th century alchemist logs, always vaguely described, and usually included hair shavings, milk, and rainwater, blessed by a village priest. Some accounts claimed it calmed hysteria. Others said it invited sleep. The instructions: apply behind ears at moonrise. Sound familiar? Maybe not the ingredients, but the concept. A soothing concoction. Ritual. Nightfall. It's not unlike the sleep sprays people buy today. Lavender mist, melatonin diffusers, weighted blankets, and warm cats curled near your feet. The desire to heal hasn't changed. The methods, well, let's just say we've gotten better about separating superstition from skincare. You lean against the stone wall, feeling the lichen's cool texture against your fingertips. The cat jumps down and weaves around your legs, brushing fur against fabric. For a moment, it's easy to imagine you're back there in some thatched cottage, wind creaking the shutters, an herb bundle hanging near the stove, and a cat curled in the corner, watching every move you make with eyes half-lidded, but always alert. A partner in your solitude. Not magic, not medicine, just presence. But sometimes that's the strongest cure of all. The wall fades behind you, now swallowed up by the hush of the woods. Your steps are quieter, too slower. Not because you're tired, but because the cat is stretching long between strides, tail lowering like a velvet ribbon trailing behind it. There's something about this part of the walk that feels different. Not darker, just older, settled, like you're walking through a memory that doesn't entirely belong to you, which is fitting, because now you're entering the world of cat superstition and symbolism, a place where logic was optional and luck was deadly serious. You've heard the basics, of course. Black cat crosses your path. Bad luck. Cat washes its face. Rain is coming. but you may not know how far back those ideas go or how much they shaped daily life. Start here. Ancient Egypt. Cats weren't just pets. There they were sacred. Embodiments of Bastet, the goddess of home fertility, and oddly enough, war. Killing a cat, even accidentally, was punishable by death. People mourned cats like family members, even mummified them with ceremony and offerings. Historians still argue whether the reverence was purely spiritual or just really great pest control rebranded as religion. Then, fast forward to medieval Europe, and the pendulum swings the other way. Now cats are feared, not worshipped, especially black ones. Why black? Because they vanished into night eyes glowing like coals. Because they moved silently. Because people love patterns, and nothing says this cat keeps showing up, and bad things keep happening like a frightened villager on day 3 of a bad harvest. You duck under a low branch, following the cat as it disappears and reappears with the theatrical timing of a ghost. A little too quiet, a little too knowing. You get it now, why people thought they were witches in disguise. Some legends said black cats were reincarnated humans. Others claimed witches could transform into cats 9 times before they were trapped in the form forever. That's where the myth of 9 lives probably started, not from science, but from paranoia. And yet, in Scotland, a black cat appearing on your porch meant prosperity. In Japan, they're symbols of good fortune. In Russia, crossing paths with one is lucky as long as it walks left to right. If it goes right to left, change your route or prepare for disappointment. It's like cats became the Rorschach test of the pre-modern world. Whatever you feared, whatever you wanted, there was a cat myth to match it. You pause as the path opens into a clearing, a circle of flat stones, some cracked, others mossy, the kind of place that looks like it should be magical, even if it isn't. The cat steps into the center and yawns dramatically, as if to say, "Yes, here is fine." You remember that in Iceland, there's a tale of the Yule cat, an enormous feline that roams the snowy countryside during Christmas. According to lore, the cat eats anyone who hasn't received new clothes before the holiday. That's right. In this version of history, your life literally depended on fashion. Meanwhile, sailors once believed that a ship's cat licking its fur against the grain meant a storm was coming. And in some parts of Germany, if a cat sat on a grave, it meant the soul beneath would never know peace. You sit on one of the stones, letting your fingers trail over its rough surface. The cat purrs and circles behind you, brushing your back once before vanishing again between the trees. You think about all those people who looked at cats and saw something more than a pet. They saw omens, messengers, threats, protectors. You wonder if it was ever really about the cats or if it was about control, about making sense of a world where crops failed, babies cried for no reason, and illness swept through towns like wind through a forest. It's easier to blame a cat than admit you don't understand anything. You look up. The trees are thinning again. The sky is pale. The stars are soft pinpricks, barely glowing. And still the myths continue. Even today in the modern world, people hesitate before adopting a black cat. Animal shelters report that black cats are less likely to be adopted, more likely to be returned. The superstition lingers unspoken, but present like a shadow in the corner of the room. But in the same breath, cat cafes flourish. Tarot readers post videos with purring familiars in the background. And some of the most iconic internet cats, Grumpy Cat Lil Bub, have become saints in the church of memes. So maybe the myths have evolved, or maybe they've just been rebranded, because the cat hasn't changed. It's still watching, still listening, still waiting. And perhaps deep down, we like that. The idea that something small and quiet might understand us better than we understand ourselves. That a creature can be elegant, ridiculous, affectionate, and deeply indifferent all at once. A mirror we didn't expect. You hear a soft meow behind you, not demanding, just acknowledging. You smile. It's enough. By now, the forest has all but disappeared behind you. The trees give way to something older than wilderness, flat, open land, under a sky that doesn't quite seem real. It's that twilight color, deep indigo at the top, fading to soft silver, near the ground like someone forgot to finish painting it in. And the cat, oh, it's not leading anymore. It's pacing beside you now, like an equal, like a guide who's walked this path 1,000 times before and is just now getting curious about your story. Tonight's part of the tale isn't about spells or strange cures. It's about something even harder to define. It's about companionship, specifically how cats slink their way into people's homes, not as tools, not as omens, but as, well, roommates. Mysterious, aloof, and utterly inconvenient roommates. You might imagine the shift was sudden. One day the cat is a spirit of the underworld. The next it's sleeping on your clean laundry. But it wasn't that tidy. The transition from myth to pet was long uneven and filled with awkward compromises. Historians still argue whether cats were truly domesticated or if they just showed up, made themselves useful, and never left. The earliest signs of human-cat cohabitation come from Cyprus around 9,500 years ago. Archaeologists found a human grave with a cat buried just beside it, both arranged carefully like companions rather than predator and prey. That might be the first time a cat and a person were treated as a unit, not a coincidence. You walk now through a reconstructed memory of that time. The ground feels warm beneath your feet, scattered with early pottery shards, broken flint tools, and a smattering of grain husks. The air smells faintly of firewood and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance you hear a low purr, not from one cat, but dozens. Because once grain storage became a thing, so did rodents. And where there are rodents, cats are not far behind. At first, people probably tolerated them out of convenience. Fewer mice, fewer food losses. But slowly it shifted. People began to notice which cats were more relaxed, less feral. Those ones hung around longer, got scraps, maybe even a name. That's the tricky thing about cats. Unlike dogs, they didn't need us. They weren't pack animals looking for a leader. They were solitary hunters who realized that if they played it cool, they could get room board and the occasional head scratch. Imagine ancient people sitting around a fire grinding grain or mending nets while a cat curls up by their feet. Not out of obedience, just out of choice. And that choice, their choice, is what makes cats feel like real companions. You follow the cat through the open land, now past a simple hut made of stone and thatch. A woman sits on a low stool, weaving something from reeds. A cat lies in her lap, tail twitching, one eye cracked open. You keep walking. Now you're in a Roman villa. Mosaic floors, warm sunlight through arches, and a black and white cat licking its paw beside a spilled bowl of figs. Now, a Viking longhouse, fish drying overhead, rough laughter, and a gray cat swiping at a child's braid, completely unbothered by the chaos. You're drifting through time, each moment stitched together by a single thread, the quiet, constant presence of a feline observer. And by the time you reach the Middle Ages again, cats are everywhere. In manuscripts, curled around the feet of scribes. In paintings, sitting smugly under banquet tables. In kitchens, barns, beds. People even wrote poems about them, small verses, about sleepy cats on cold winter nights. It wasn't all suspicion and witchcraft. Sometimes it was just company. One particular poem from 9th century Ireland speaks of a monk and his cat, Pangur Bán. The monk compares his work of writing and translating to the cat's nightly hunt for mice. They're both seekers, both solitary, both content in their own ways. It's oddly touching. 1,000 years old, and somehow it still feels like something you'd read in a modern blog post titled, "My Cat and I Are Basically Soulmates." But don't get too misty-eyed. Cats weren't about to give up their mystique. Even in households where they were beloved, they weren't always pets in the way we think of them. They were still animals, semi-wild, with one paw in the world of people and the other in the darkness outside the firelight. They'd disappear for days, reappear with something unpleasant in their mouth. Knock over your ink bottle, then look at you like you were the one being unreasonable. And yet, people love them. You pause now beside a low wooden fence. Beyond it, a cottage garden grows herbs and beans. A cat sits on a stump tail curled neatly, staring into the dusk. You stare back, and for a moment time folds in on itself. You realize that whether it's 500 BCE or this very moment, there's always been something deeply comforting about a cat that chooses to stay near you. Not because it has to, not because you've bribed it, but because for reasons known only to itself, it decided you were worthy of its attention, even just for tonight. That's what companionship means here. not control, not possession, just a mutual agreement to coexist, sometimes in the same room, sometimes in the same silence. You keep walking, but slower now. The cat follows behind you, for once as if letting you take the lead. Your footsteps feel lighter, the air feels warmer, and somewhere in the distance, a bell rings. But this time it's not a warning, it's just a sound. Just another thread in the long, quiet tapestry of living alongside something wild that never asked to be tamed. The bell sound fades behind you, soft as breath. The cat stretches again, then hops onto a low stone wall as if it's been waiting for this part, like it knows what story comes next. Because now you're stepping into a strange little corner of history. Not a battlefield, not a court, but the dusty shelves of an old forgotten book. The place where laws about cats live. That's right. Cats were so integrated into people's lives, so useful, so symbolic, so frustrating, that eventually lawmakers had to weigh in. And you, dear wanderer of sleepy knowledge, are about to find out just how many ways humans tried to put a leash on something fundamentally unleashed. Let's start with the ancient Irish. In the Brecon Laws, a complex legal system in early medieval Ireland, cats weren't just animals. They had categories. A tame cat was an ailbe. A guard cat was called a cat she, and was treated with particular respect. Damaging someone's prized cat, accidentally or not, could earn you a fine. Or worse, a community scandal, which might have been more painful than a fine. Historians still argue whether these laws were widely enforced or more like theoretical guidelines for keeping peace in rural communities. But the point remains, people recognize the value of a good cat. The same goes for Welsh law. The medieval laws of Hywel Dda, the famous 10th century King of Wales, outlined exactly how much a cat was worth depending on its age and purpose. A kitten before its eyes opened worth a loaf of bread. A Mauser cat proven to catch rodents, 3 pence. That was real money. You could feed a small family for days on that. And the law wasn't just about value. There were rules for theft, injury, and even responsibility. If your cat destroyed something, or let's say caused a neighbor's prized grain bag to spill open because it decided it was a bed, you could be held accountable. Picture it. 2 men standing in a village square, each gesturing wildly, while the local judge leans down, scribbling as a fat ginger cat naps in the sun. Was it this cat? Or the other one, who knows? The cat certainly doesn't care. And the legal precedent rests entirely on whether the cat can be proven to have been motivated. Good luck with that. By the 14th and 15th centuries, cats had become a recognized presence in urban life. Town bylaws from parts of Germany and the Low Countries, modern-day Belgium and Netherlands sometimes mentioned rules about keeping cats indoors after dark, especially during outbreaks of plague or suspicion. It wasn't always to protect them. Sometimes it was to prevent them from being accused of mischief or witchcraft. Remember, this was the era of paranoia. A cat appearing at the wrong place at the wrong time could be enough to get someone accused of sorcery. The church often looked sideways at cats, especially black ones. Yet, the farmers and millers and bakers, they looked at cats and saw protection. A cat in the barn meant fewer rats. Fewer rats meant more food. More food meant fewer angry gods. You step now onto a cobbled road. It's cracked, uneven, the way medieval streets always were. A few torchlights flicker in the doorways of timber-framed houses. You hear the chatter of merchants closing shop, the distant rattle of a cartwheel. A tabby weaves between barrels, chasing shadows. No one stops it. No one scolds it. They know it's working. And then you reach a monastery, quiet. Cold stone walls, stained with time and incense. You'd think monks wouldn't care much for animals, right? But some monasteries, particularly in the British Isles, actually made provisions for cats. In fact, in many abbeys, the cat was one of the few animals allowed to roam freely indoors. Not for cuddles, though maybe that happened. No, it was for preserving precious books. Mice loved parchment. A single gnaw could destroy months of copying. So, monasteries tolerated and sometimes revered cats as protectors of knowledge. There are even marginalia, those little doodles monks would add to the edges of illuminated manuscripts, where you see cats licking themselves, pouncing on letters, or even pooping in the margins. Scholars aren't sure if these were jokes, warnings, or just monks being bored during night shifts. The best part, some old books still carry tiny smudged paw prints. Literal history stepped on by some long-forgotten feline who just wanted to be in the middle of everything. You cross through a cloister garden, now the air still and sweet with rosemary and thyme. A cat leaps silently onto a low wall beside a statue of Saint Jerome, the patron saint of translators. Legend says he had a lion for a companion. But if you look closely at the older paintings, sometimes the lion looks suspiciously like an oversized cat with a dramatic mane. In a way, law and religion both failed to define cats. They tried to assign value-risk punishment, but cats, they just kept doing their thing. They didn't sit when called. They didn't defend territory with theatrical barking. They simply existed between thresholds, between rules, between moments. That perhaps is their greatest power. You walk on. The cat trails behind now, flicking its tail lazily like a metronome, keeping the rhythm of centuries. And just as you reach the edge of the old road, you pass a faded sign etched in Latin and iron, "Let the rat beware." Underneath it, a little brass dish, empty, except for one curled up ginger cat fast asleep. Of course, the ginger cat lifts its head briefly as you pass, stretches with the kind of indifference only cats can master, and then resumes its nap like nothing in the world could be more important than sleep. You smile, because by now you understand that in the grand theater of history, the cat doesn't play a role. It writes its own script and exits stage left when it's bored. And speaking of exits, let's talk about doorways. Not just literal ones, though. Yes, cats have always had a thing for thresholds, hovering in them, refusing to choose a side, meowing to go out only to meow to come back in. But also symbolic doorways. The boundary between the seen and the unseen, between protection and danger, between the living and, well, not. You arrive now at the entrance of an old stone cottage. The lintel is low, the walls covered in climbing ivy, and the wood of the door polished smooth by generations of hands. But there's something odd at your feet. A skeleton, tiny, curled. It's a cat. This isn't as grim as it sounds. In fact, what you're looking at is an old protective charm. A buried cat, usually beneath the floorboards, sometimes sealed inside a wall, was thought to ward off evil spirits, protect the home from witchcraft, or bring fertility to the land. No one's entirely sure where or when this practice started, but mummified cats have been found all across Britain and parts of continental Europe. Historians still argue whether these cats were buried alive, grim, or simply interred after a natural death, slightly less grim. Either way, the message was clear. The cat wasn't just a guest in the house, it was its spiritual sentinel. You step inside, and the temperature drops ever so slightly. The room smells like peat smoke and dried lavender. In the corner sits a narrow bed, the covers rumpled. Beside it, a worn wooden chest, and next to that, a small painted figurine. It's a cat, tail wrapped neatly around its paws, eyes alert, watching. These charms weren't only in homes. In some rural churches, people scratched cat symbols into the wooden pews or near the altar. Farmers carved cats into the beams of barns. Blacksmiths etched them onto iron gates, all to say, this place is guarded. Now, of course, we don't really do this anymore. You're more likely to see a decorative live laugh love sign on a kitchen wall than a hand-carved feline guardian. But maybe the instinct is still there. After all, people still say cats can sense things we can't. Ghosts, earthquakes, bad boyfriends. In Japanese folklore, the bakaneko and nekomata are shape-shifting cat spirits that can manipulate the dead or control fire. They're sometimes vengeful, sometimes protective, always powerful. In Norse mythology, the goddess Freyja rode a chariot pulled by giant cats. Farmers would leave offerings to her cats in hopes of a good harvest. Even in ancient China, the Li Shu, a protective cat deity, was invoked to keep rats away from grain stores. Sometimes people would hang images of this spirit in their homes, drawn in bright colors with wide, glowing eyes. You find yourself now in a strange little space, part shrine, part storeroom. Candles flicker against stone walls. Shadows stretch like feline silhouettes across the floor. At the center, a mosaic, a cat again. But this time, it's made of hundreds of tiny tiles, each one worn smooth by time and footsteps. It's hard not to feel like you're being watched, but not in a scary way, in a curious, slightly judgmental, you could have trimmed your bangs better kind of way, the kind of gaze every cat gives, the kind that sees through you but still lets you stay. You sit for a moment beside the mosaic, letting the hush of centuries wrap around you. The candlelight dances, and in the flickering the cat seems to move just slightly. A trick of the light, probably. Outside the shrine, the air feels lighter, fresher. A soft wind rustles the tall grass. The moon is higher now, throwing silver across the hills. You spot the cat again, your cat. Not the ginger one, not the mosaic, the one who's been walking with you this whole time. It's waiting, patient, tail swaying in slow arcs. You walk toward it, and as you do, you notice something curious under your feet. Symbols carved into the path. Some look like stars, others like letters you don't recognize. But right in the center of the walkway, etched deeper than the rest, is a paw print, left there maybe by some long-ago mason, or maybe by the cat itself. A final signature, because in the end, these creatures weren't just hunters, or companions, or demons, or gods. They were witnesses to our stories, our fears, our laughter, our laws, our superstitions, our hopes. They sat in the corners of our rooms and watched us love, argue, dream, and die. And they never said a word, just blinked, yawned, curled up, and stayed. The night deepens as you follow the winding path beyond the shrine, the air hushed and heavy with the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. The cat stays just ahead of you, barely making a sound, leading you like a dream you're not quite sure you're still having. It turns briefly to glance back, eyes gleaming like moonlit glass, and then disappears behind a bend in the hedgerow. When you round the corner, you find yourself not in another village or on some ancient dirt trail, but inside a dusty wood-paneled study. One of those dim, slightly musty spaces lined with books, scrolls, and that one globe in the corner no one has spun since 1923. The fireplace glows low. There's an overstuffed armchair, a pipe resting in an ashtray, and naturally, a cat curled on the windowsill, tail flicking every so often, like it's annoyed with your tardiness. Welcome to the age of enlightenment. Yes, that time when rationality and reason were supposed to sweep away the old world of superstition and myths. But did cats get left behind? Of course not. They simply adapted. You see, in the 17th and 18th centuries, cats began a quiet transformation from suspicious outliers to charming residents of the educated home. Philosophers, scientists, and writers started to adopt cats not just as pets, but as companions of intellect. Descartes is often cited as treating animals as soulless automatons, though historians still argue whether that included the family cat that supposedly haunted his lap during late-night writing sessions. Voltaire, on the other hand, adored his cats, reportedly referring to one as his muse. He may not have believed in divine cats, but he clearly thought there was something transcendent in the way they observed the world, often from atop his manuscript piles. And let's not forget Sir Isaac Newton, who is often but incorrectly credited with inventing the cat flap. The story goes that Newton, working in his lab, got tired of his cat scratching at the door. So he cut a small hole to let it come and go freely, supposedly also cutting a smaller one for her kittens. Practical? Absolutely. True? Probably not. But charming? Utterly. In truth, cats were becoming symbols of domesticity. They were no longer just barn animals or omens of doom. They were graceful fixtures of tea rooms and parlors, snoozing on windowsills as their humans read Rousseau or wrote very long letters about the French countryside. Of course, not everyone was on board. In many rural areas, older beliefs clung tight. Some communities still whispered about the black cat who watched too long, or the silent paw that foretold death. In these places, cats straddled both worlds, the rational and the mystical. And people, being wonderfully contradictory, treated them accordingly. They'd light a candle for St. Francis and then knock 3 times on the door frame if a cat crossed their path. As you walk deeper into the study, a breeze lifts a curtain. Behind it, tacked to the wall, is an old newspaper clipping. The headline reads, "Cat Judges Village Baking Contest." The article is a parody, of course, from a 1750s humor broadsheet, but the fact that such a thing could be printed and read aloud in taverns tells you something. Cats had become public figures, part joke, part icon. You couldn't quite ignore them anymore. You brush your hand over the surface of a desk, sending up a fine puff of dust. Beneath it is a handwritten letter, folded carefully. You open it. It's dated 1793. The writing is a mix of formality and affection. A young woman writes to her sister, "Dearest Alice, our Minette has birthed 5 kittens. Mother insists we keep only one. I have chosen the striped one. She reminds me of Father Quiet and always watching. And there it is again, that sense that cats see more than they let on. You settle into the armchair now, warmth from the fire crawling slowly across your legs. The cat on the windowsill doesn't move, but you swear its tail slows as if acknowledging that this quiet, half-forgotten moment is exactly what cats are made for. Outside, rain begins to tap softly on the panes. You imagine the world beyond the study, a cobbled street, glistening, flickering lanterns, someone hurrying home with a loaf of bread tucked under their arm. Maybe a black cat dashes past them, puddle spray in its wake. Maybe they pause, touch their hat for luck, and smile despite themselves. Because now, even in the supposedly modern world, the cat still carries echoes of every story that came before. It's been protector, villain, goddess, Mauser, lawyers, headache, Monk's assistant child's best friend. It's been adored and loathed, fed and starved, painted and burned and buried in the walls. And through it all, it stayed. A little aloof, a little magical, a lot tired. Just like you. The cat leaps down from the windowsill, silent, effortless, and with a glance over its shoulder, walks straight through the back wall, which is not as alarming as it sounds, because the wall isn't really a wall. It's a veil, thin as old paper, flickering like candlelight. You follow, of course. What else can you do? You've come this far. And besides, that's what cats are for, ushering you into the next strange chapter without bothering to explain anything. You step into what looks like a modern living room. Wood floors. A bookshelf sagging under the weight of too many unread novels. A television with a cracked remote. A cat tree in the corner that's seen better days. The scent of coffee grounds and something baking, not quite cookies, but close enough to make you want one. And on the rug, a child cross-legged, holding a stuffed animal and whispering a story to a cat curled beside them. The cat's eyes are half closed, not sleeping, just listening. Because even now, in this present age of push notifications and overpriced streaming services, the ancient roles still linger. The child is telling the cat about school, about a friend who was mean today, about a book where a knight turns into a frog, and about the weird dream they had, where the moon was made of string cheese. The cat doesn't flinch, doesn't blink, just listens. And that right there is everything. Cats were never just cats. They've always been your audience. You sit down across the room, your back against a wall, lined with framed photos. You see one of a woman in the 1940s holding a tabby on her hip. Another of a man in a 70s suit, laughing as a black cat paws at his tie. A recent one shows a young couple in sweatpants, their apartment clearly messy, a ginger cat nestled between them like royalty. The decades pass, styles change, but the cat remains. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaks. You can imagine someone coming down for a midnight snack. They'll probably find the cat in the kitchen already waiting, pretending to be starving, despite the untouched food bowl from earlier. It's a ritual, one passed down generation to generation. And the world around them changes fast. Technology surges, beliefs shift, neighborhoods transform. But every once in a while, someone still gasps when they see a black cat dash across their path. Someone still leaves out a saucer of milk. Someone still looks into a pair of golden eyes and says, "You understand? Don't you?" Historians still argue whether this persistence is nostalgia or something deeper. Whether we cling to cats because they were there in the caves with us, because they curled beside our ancestors' fires, because they were the quiet link between what we know and what we feel. You glance at your feet. The cat is there again, the same one you'd like to think so. It stretches long and languid, and then, for the first time, presses gently against your leg. A whisper of warmth, a brush of velvet fur. It doesn't stay long. just long enough to remind you that yes, you are seen. And then it walks toward the front door. This time it looks back as if to say, that's enough for tonight. You don't need to follow. Not anymore. The lights in the house dim, one by one soft glows, giving way to shadows. Outside a breeze plays with the chimes by the window, their song distant and meandering, like a lullaby you almost remember from childhood. The world slows. Your thoughts, once wandering and wild, begin to soften, to quiet. The cat, wherever it is now, is likely asleep, curled into that perfect, infinite spiral, one paw tucked beneath its chin. Maybe it dreams of fields or fish or nothing at all. Maybe it just rests deeply and completely. You do too. Because for all the mystery and history, for all the symbols and spells and stories, what matters most in this moment is that you've made it here. To the stillness, to the pause between one breath and the next, to the comfort of being watched over, even if only by a creature who pretends not to care. You are safe. You are warm. You are enough. Let the weight of the day drift down and away. Let your muscles ease your jaw. Unclench your eyes, grow heavier with each passing second. The night is long, but gentle. And nothing is expected of you right now, except to rest. So breathe, settle in, and sleep.